Why did the room fall so silent when she walked in? Captain Phoenix had been in enough rooms to recognize the soundless verdict before a word was spoken. The briefing table was full of men older, louder, confident in their own shadows, but when she stepped toward the podium, their voices clipped off as if cut by a switch. Even the shuffling of papers seemed to stop. She could feel it again, the same weight she had carried since the academy. That unspoken question in every gaze. What is she doing here? "Maybe we should let the men handle this one, sweetheart," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes muttered, loud enough to be heard across the room. The smirk that followed wasn't hidden. Laughter rippled low along the table. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she placed her mission folder on the podium with steady hands and fixed her eyes on the projection screen. Her voice, when it came, was controlled, crisp, the kind of voice that hid the sting of words that weren't new. But what none of them in that room could know, what not even Hayes himself suspected, was that in less than 24 hours, he would be the one begging her to attempt the most dangerous rescue mission in Air Force history. Phoenix was 28 years old, 5'6", with dark hair she kept tied to regulation, and eyes that never softened once a flight helmet was on. By numbers alone, she was impossible to dismiss. She had logged more hours in the cockpit than many men 10 years her senior. She held dual degrees in aeronautical engineering and advanced physics, graduating summa cum. Her simulator and weapons scores ranked at the very top of the squadron. She had flown 27 combat missions, real ones, not just support runs, though her peers loved to call them that. But in the 23rd Fighter Squadron at Al Air Base, none of that mattered. To them, she was not Phoenix, the pilot. She was the woman who didn't belong in combat. The mission briefing began like all others. Colonel Hayes outlined the objective: a high-value financier, responsible for funneling money to the networks that had claimed dozens of American lives in the last 2 years. His compound was isolated, straddling the fault line between the Syrian and Iraqi border. "Mission profile is straightforward," Hayes said, the click of his laser pointer echoing against the wall. "Precision strike. One pass. We're in, we're out. Extreme edge of range, so no loiter time, no margin for error." Phoenix's eyes stayed on the maps, on the glowing rings marking air defenses. Something wasn't adding up. She raised her hand. "Sir, what's the intelligence assessment on surface-to-air threats?" The question was clean, professional. A laugh broke across the room. Major Rick Viper, the squadron's self-declared alpha, leaned back in his chair. His grin was designed for the others to see. "Worried about getting shot at, Phoenix. Maybe you'd rather stick to flying transports." Her reply was calm, almost quiet. "I'm concerned about mission success. That requires understanding all threat parameters before we commit." It should have landed as logic. Instead, it landed like defiance. Hayes shuffled his notes, not looking at her. "Intelligence reports minimal air defense, outdated systems, nothing our countermeasures can't handle." Minimal, outdated. It didn't feel right. Not for a target worth risking 4 Raptors on a long-range strike. She wrote it down, underlining it twice. Then came the insult, wrapped as an order. "Phoenix, you'll fly wingman for Major. Your job, overwatch. He leads the strike." She straightened. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer for primary attack role." The room erupted in muffled laughter. Chairs squeaked as men leaned back, enjoying the performance. Captain Jake Hawk chuckled. "Phoenix, no offense, but this isn't a training hop. We need combat experience." "I have combat experience," she said softly. Her voice didn't rise, but her gaze sharpened. 15 missions over Afghanistan, 12 over Syria. I've engaged and destroyed enemy aircraft and ground targets. Support missions, cut in. This is different." Her eyes hardened. Different because it requires precision, because it requires skill. My accuracy scores are the highest in the squadron. My flight time in combat zones is greater than most pilots here. My systems knowledge. "Enough," Hayes snapped. Has seniority, you'll fly wing or you'll fly training. Those are your options. The weight of the room pressed in again, suffocating, familiar. The decision had already been made before she'd walked through the door. She nodded once. "I'll fly wingman, sir." The briefing dissolved into side chatter. Assignments were given. Questions were asked, but not the one she held back. She learned long ago not to press too hard in public. Instead, she went back to her quarters. 2 hours of quiet. 2 hours of poring over satellite images and encrypted intelligence notes that others had brushed past. 2 hours of calculations, drawing lines no one else wanted to see. And what she saw made her stomach twist. The intel was wrong, not outdated, deliberately incomplete. The compound wasn't lightly defended. It bristled with modern surface-to-air systems, 6 at least, each with overlapping range, coordinated networks, jamming equipment. Whoever ran this operation knew exactly what they were doing. But that wasn't the worst of it. Buried in a classified addendum she shouldn't have been able to access, Phoenix found a line of text that froze her blood. Naval Special Warfare Unit, SEAL Team Alpha, active within target grid. Her breath caught, SEALs on the ground, at the exact coordinates slated for bombing. She closed the file slowly, and for the first time that day, a real question pressed into her chest. Did Hayes know? Or had someone higher up decided not to tell them at all? She tried again during the individual briefings, tried to bring it up delicately, carefully. Hayes shut her down with a practiced smile. "You're overthinking this, Captain. Leave intelligence to the professionals. Your job is to fly your jet." "Sir, I'm concerned about potential friendly fire." "That's need to know, and you don't." The words cut sharper than any insult. She left the room with silence around her, the same silence she had carried since the academy. At 1200 hours, 4 Raptors lifted into the desert sky. Phoenix kept her jet tight on swing, her sensors alive, her hands steady on the controls. They climbed to 40,000 feet, cutting northwest across borders in silence. For 30 minutes, nothing. Just the steady hum of engines, the dark curve of horizon. Then her screens lit like a flare. "Viper lead, this is Phoenix," she transmitted, calm, steady. "Multiple radar signatures, SA-21 systems, at least 6, all active." Ghost scoffed. "Intelligence briefed minimal." "Negative, these are active, coordinated. Recommend adjusting profile." "Phoenix, maintain radio discipline. Follow the brief." Her jaw tightened. She watched the signals multiply, jamming pulses crawling across her spectrum analyzer. "Viper leads," she warned again. "They know we're here." But no one listened. And then, at exactly 12:47 hours, the world erupted. 6 missiles screamed from 6 hidden sites, a web of white fire cutting upward toward their formation. The radio crackled. Hayes's voice roared from command. "All aircraft abort, abort mission." But Phoenix wasn't listening to Hayes anymore. Because another voice had cut across the emergency frequency. A voice raw with desperation. Any station, this is SEAL Team Alpha Actual. We are taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Extraction is blown. We need immediate air support. Coordinates follow." She froze. She knew those numbers. Her eyes flicked to her display, to the exact grid they had been ordered to bomb. SEAL Team Alpha wasn't operating in the target zone. They were trapped underneath it. 12 men surrounded, outnumbered, minutes from death. And her finger hovered over the throttle. If she followed orders, she'd live. She'd turn back safe. If she broke them, she'd lose everything. Career, reputation, maybe even her life. Her radio hissed again. Firm, "Phoenix RTB immediately, that's a direct order." Hayes piled on. "You are not authorized for close air support. Return to base." She looked down at the desert far below. She thought of 12 men fighting for breath, for minutes, for one more chance to see home again. Her hand moved. Command Phoenix declaring emergency. I'm going in. And with that, she pushed her jet into a dive. How much time did 12 men really have? Minutes, seconds. Phoenix's jet cut downward through the high sky, her body pressed into the seat as gravity clawed at her ribs. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding against the hiss of the oxygen mask. On her radar, the missile trails bloomed like angry white scars. Phoenix abort, that's an order, Hayes's voice cracked sharp through the headset. She shut her mic. She couldn't waste focus arguing with men 1,000 miles from the fight. Instead, her hand slid across the weapons panel. Air-to-air, wrong tools for the job. Missiles built for fighters, not dug-in insurgents. No laser-guided bombs. No smart munitions. Just speed, instinct, and an aircraft that had never been designed for close support. Her stomach knotted. This wasn't training anymore. One mistake, one miscalculation, and she wouldn't just die, she'd kill the very men she came to save. SEAL Team Alpha, this is Phoenix inbound, she said at last. Her voice stayed calm, though every nerve burned. Pop smoke. Give me target priorities. For a long second, only static. Then a voice answered, rough, strained, but steady. Phoenix Alpha Actual. We've got 2 wounded who can't move. Surrounded by 40-plus fighters with mortars and heavy weapons. If you can't keep them off us. His words trailed. He didn't have to finish. They both knew the ending. Her HUD lit with a thin streak of color, smoke rising from the canyon below. She banked, rolling her Raptor low into the valley, air screaming against the fuselage. And there they were, tiny figures pinned into a rocky outcrop, muzzle flashes sparking from every angle around them. Dust and fire cracked upward as mortars detonated closer and closer. She swallowed, God help me. First pass, her hands moved on instinct. She selected an AIM 120, a missile never meant for this role, and programmed a proximity fuse. Her crosshairs skimmed over the enemy ridge line. She squeezed. The missile streaked forward, slamming into a cluster of firing positions. The hillside erupted. Her radio crackled, shouts from the ground, urgent but alive. Phoenix, a perfect hit. East side clear. She didn't have time to respond. She pulled the jet into another tight bank, the G-forces stabbing down her spine. Every movement had to be precise, feet, inches, meters from her allies. This wasn't flying anymore. This was threading a needle through chaos. She dropped to barely 200 feet, skimming ground fire, and fired again. Another missile, another enemy position shattered. Each run carved seconds of survival for the men below. Seconds that cost her fuel, altitude, and more of her own fragile margin. Above, her radar screamed. SA-21 lock. She yanked the stick, diving under the missile's arc, feeling her jet shudder as the air split apart. Phoenix, you're crazy, his voice barked faintly in her ear, almost swallowed by static. You're gonna get yourself killed. She ignored him. Her focus was below, always below. Another pass. Another burst of fire from her cannon, this time precise, sharp, controlled. Tracers stitched across the canyon wall, cutting down machine gun nests that had pinned the SEALs in place. She heard shouting on the net, not panic, but something else. Hope. For 20 minutes, she fought with nothing but instinct and a not meant for the job. She became part of the canyon itself, rising, diving, twisting between rock and fire. Every second stretched long. Every choice was permanent. Then came the voice again. Phoenix Alpha Actual. We've got 2 wounded on litters. Our extraction bird won't land until we're clear. We need 15 more minutes of cover. 15. She glanced at her fuel gauge. It was already dipping into red. 15 meant crossing the line. 15 meant maybe not making it home. Her breath caught. I could turn away now. No one would blame me. They'd already call me reckless. Hayes would ground me for life, would celebrate. But then she looked again at the smoke, the flashes of gunfire, the silhouettes of men who had trusted her with their last chance. Copy Alpha, you'll have 15. She banked again, pressing deeper into the storm. The next minutes blurred. Enemy positions fell one by one. She pushed her jet lower than training manuals ever allowed. Sometimes she felt the belly scrape turbulence from the canyon walls, warning her she was within meters of disaster. Twice she took fire, small arms rounds slapping against the fuselage, rattling through the cockpit like hail. Lights blinked on her console. Systems degraded. But her hands never wavered. Then at last came the words she had been clawing toward. Phoenix Alpha Actual, LZ Secure, all men accounted, extraction inbound. She pulled the jet high, breath breaking against the mask. Below, two Black Hawks skimmed into the canyon, rotors chopping dust into a storm. Figures scrambled aboard, limping, dragging, carrying. 12 men, still alive. One of them turned, just before boarding, and raised a hand in salute toward the shrinking shadow of her Raptor. She exhaled, long and shaking. They're going home. But she wasn't safe yet. Her gauges screamed empty. Less than fumes left. She switched tanks, praying for another few minutes of thrust. Her jet systems flickered, warnings stacking across her HUD. She banked toward base, too far, maybe impossible. Every mile felt like theft. The silence in her headset broke only when she crossed back over friendly airspace. Hayes's voice was waiting, cold and sharp. Captain, you are ordered to report for immediate debrief. You've disobeyed direct orders, conducted unauthorized combat actions, and risked Air Force property. She didn't answer, not yet. She landed on fumes, her wheels screeching against the tarmac as ground crews scrambled to meet her. The jet was scorched, pockmarked with holes, but it was back. She was back. The debrief began the way she knew it would. Hayes behind the table, eyes like stone. In the corner, smug in his silence, smirking as if he'd already written the ending. Captain, Hayes said, you disobeyed direct orders. You put an aircraft worth hundreds of millions at unnecessary risk. You jeopardized mission integrity. Do you have anything to say? Her voice was steady, tired but steady. Yes, sir. 12 SEALs are alive because I didn't follow your orders. The silence that followed was heavy, accusatory. That wasn't your decision to make, Hayes shot back. You're not a close air support pilot. You had no authorization. Cut in, what you did was reckless, showboating, trying to prove women can handle combat. You could have killed them all. Her eyes lifted, sharp as steel. Showboating. Major, your plan nearly killed them. Your refusal to acknowledge the defenses almost killed us. Colonel Hayes, your omission of SEAL presence violated every principle of mission planning. I acted because I was the only one willing to accept the truth staring us in the face. The room fell silent again, not out of respect but out of shock. No one ever spoke to Hayes that way. But before he could answer, the door burst open. An aide hurried in. Sir, priority call, Central Command. Hayes vanished into his office. The room simmered with silence. Phoenix sat still, hands folded, knowing the verdict was already written in the eyes around her. 15 minutes later, Hayes returned. His face had changed. Captain, he said slowly, General has just reviewed SEAL Team Alpha's report. They've recommended you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. They've also requested you personally for future special operations support. The words sank like stones into the room, stared, blinked. No one spoke. Hayes's voice hardened again, though not as convincingly. Your actions today, what we expect of Air Force pilots. Phoenix said nothing, not triumph, not even relief, just quiet, because in her chest she knew the truth. This wasn't about medals or promotion or silencing doubters. It was about 12 men who would see another sunrise, 12 families who wouldn't receive folded flags. And that was enough. Why did he walk toward her like he already knew her? 3 weeks after the mission, Phoenix stepped off a transport at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The air was heavy with humidity, thick enough to cling to her uniform. She wasn't used to this kind of base, not the noise, not the shadows, not the quiet weight of men who belonged to a different world. This was the home of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, pilots who didn't just fly, they fought wars in the dark, carrying the most secret warriors into battles the world would never read about. She had been ordered here, transferred, a punishment disguised as an opportunity. She hadn't decided which it really was. "Phoenix," a voice called across the tarmac. She turned. A man in Navy uniform, tall, weathered, with gray at his temples and eyes that carried too many nights without sleep. He walked with the kind of presence only men who had commanded life and death could carry. He stopped in front of her, offered his hand. "Lieutenant Commander Tom, SEAL Team Alpha, Reaper." Her chest tightened. She knew the name. She'd heard his voice over the radio, breaking through static, calling for help when no help was supposed to come. "Sir," she said carefully. "Do sir me," he replied, shaking his head. "If it weren't for you, I'd be a name etched into stone right now, and 12 families would be wearing black." She didn't know what to say. Silence seemed safer. "You don't understand," said, lowering his voice. "We've worked with a lot of pilots. Most of them are good. A few are excellent, but what you did," he stopped, searching for words. "You risked everything, not because it was smart, not because you were ordered, but because it was the only way to bring us home. That wasn't training, that was character." She looked away, heat rising in her chest. "I was just doing my job." "No," said firmly. "Your job was to turn around, but you didn't, and we're alive because of that." For the first time since the mission, she let herself breathe out slowly. She hadn't realized how heavy that day still sat inside her. They walked together across the tarmac toward the hangars where new machines waited. Not F-22 Raptors, these were different. Black Hawks, Chinooks, Ospreys, aircraft meant not for dominance of the sky but survival in the mud. Inside, she was introduced to her new world. The regiment's pilots, men and women who spoke less, watched more. Their eyes carried quiet calculation, the kind born from missions that demanded both precision and sacrifice. The first day was simple, a test flight. They wanted to see if she could handle it, if a fighter pilot could strip away the luxury of altitude and embrace the knife's edge of low-level flight. The Osprey was a beast compared to her Raptor. Heavier, slower, ungainly when handled wrong. But it could do something her old aircraft couldn't. Drop into valleys, skim treetops, land on impossible slopes, and carry men out under fire. She strapped in, the rotors whining into a scream, and pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft lifted, not like a jet, but like a defiant giant forced into the air. Her hands read the controls. She felt the lag, the strain, the weight. It wasn't finesse. It was stubbornness. "Phoenix," the instructor's voice crackled in her headset. "Take her low, 10 feet off the deck, hold her steady." Her gut clenched. 10 feet. Fighter pilots didn't fly at 10 feet. 10 feet was where mistakes ended careers, but she pushed down the fear. The Osprey skimmed over grass and dirt, blades whipping dust into storms around her. She gritted her teeth, held her line, adjusted every microsecond. The aircraft fought her, but she fought back harder. At the end of the run, the instructor's voice was quiet. Not bad at all. It was the closest thing to respect she'd heard in months. Days blurred into weeks, training missions layered over one another, night insertions, mountain extractions, simulated ambushes where she had to hover while imaginary bullets shredded the sky. Her old squadron had laughed when she spoke. These men didn't laugh. They simply watched, waited. And slowly she felt the silence change. Not judgment this time, something else, quiet acknowledgement. But even as she pushed herself into this new world, a shadow still followed. The question she hadn't dared to ask. Why had the intelligence been wrong that day? Someone had known SEAL Team Alpha was in the target zone. Someone had hidden it. And the truth gnawed at her at night, when the hangar was dark and her thoughts had no throttle to outrun them. She didn't bring it up, not yet, but she carried it. Then came the day brought her to the team, the real team. They were in the hangar, gearing up for a new cycle of missions. Men with scars, laughter, and the kind of ease that only comes from surviving the impossible together. Clapped her shoulder. Boys, this is Phoenix, the reason we're standing here instead of buried in sand. For a moment, silence. Then one of the younger SEALs stepped forward, hand extended. You flew like a demon out there. I thought we were done until I saw your shadow overhead. Another added, you stayed longer than you had fuel for. We heard the engine coughing. You could left. You didn't. The room filled with nods. Small, unspoken gestures. Not loud, not theatrical, just acknowledgement. It broke something inside her, not in a way that hurt, in a way that healed. For years, she had walked into rooms that fell silent for the wrong reasons. This was the first time silence felt like respect. Over the next month, she flew with them. Missions small and missions brutal. Insertions in blacked-out mountains. Extractions under fire. Each one tested not just her skill, but her will. And with every flight, the SEALs learned what she already knew. She wasn't there to prove herself. She was there because she wouldn't leave men behind. The legend grew quietly. Phoenix, the pilot who stayed. The one who made impossible runs. The one who bent machines to her will and refused to let death have the last word. Yet even as respect grew, the weight of that first mission never left her. Late at night, when the base was quiet, she'd replay it in her head. The laughter in the briefing, the dismissals, the lies in the intelligence. And she wondered what else was being hidden. But she buried the question, because missions didn't wait, lives didn't pause while truth unraveled. Her chance to answer it would come later. For now, all that mattered was the next call, the next impossible order, the next set of coordinates whispered into her headset in the middle of the night. Because when Phoenix lifted into the air with men's lives tied to her blades, nothing else existed. Not prejudice, not politics, not career. Only one thing. Bring them home. And with every mission, the silence around her grew louder, but no longer the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of trust. What kind of pilot agrees to land where no map exists? 8 months after the day she saved SEAL Team Alpha, Phoenix sat in the dim light of the operations tent, staring at the grainy satellite image projected on the wall. The terrain looked more like a nightmare than a battlefield. Jagged, valleys so narrow they seemed like knife cuts, weather patterns scrawled in unreadable swirls. It was a place most commanders avoided. They called it Grid Zone Echo 9. The locals had another name for it, the place where maps go blind. And tonight, 2 SEAL teams were trapped inside it. The briefing officer's voice trembled as he laid out the facts. They were tasked with capturing a high-value target moving through the mountains, operation compromised. Enemy reinforcements cut off there. They're cornered in a valley here. His laser pointer circled a blotch of shadow. At least 80 hostiles closing in. A murmur swept the room. Helicopters couldn't fly there. Fixed-wing aircraft couldn't maneuver there. The weather was closing fast, with clouds thick enough to swallow radar whole. The officer hesitated before saying the last part. We've already lost contact with one drone. Another turned back. No aircraft has operated in Echo 9 in years. Phoenix felt the silence. It was the same silence that used to weigh against her, but this time it wasn't doubt, it was fear. Her name broke the stillness. Phoenix, the mission commander said. His voice wasn't dismissive, it wasn't mocking, it was almost pleading. You're the only pilot with a chance, are you up for it? She didn't answer right away. She thought of Echo 9, the uncharted valleys, the storms, the sheer impossibility of threading an aircraft through terrain even eagles avoided. She thought of the 24 men on the ground, tired, running out of ammunition, waiting for a sound in the sky that might never come. She drew in a slow breath, Send me the coordinates. An experimental V-22 Osprey was rolled onto the pad within the hour. Not sleek like her old Raptor, not invisible to radar, but versatile, the strange hybrid that could fly like a plane, hover like a helicopter, and do both badly enough to terrify anyone in the cockpit. Phoenix checked the fuel-topped, systems green, the cabin stripped bare to make room for men who were running out of time. Appeared at her side. He wasn't on the mission, but his eyes said he wanted to be. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Her gaze never left the Osprey. Yes, I do. Phoenix. They're waiting for me, she said simply. No one else is coming. He nodded once. He didn't argue again. She climbed in. Engines roared. Rotors bit into the night air. And with a shudder that felt more like defiance than lift, the Osprey rose. The flight toward Echo 9 was smooth at first. Too smooth. The kind of quiet before a storm that pressed into her chest like a warning. As she approached the mountains, turbulence hit like fists. The sky shook. The aircraft groaned. Warnings lit her console. She pushed lower below the clouds, into the jagged teeth of stone. Her visor filled with darkness and rock. No horizon, no reference, just instinct. Phoenix, this is Alpha Actual, the radio crackled at last. His voice ragged but still strong. We're holding position. Ammo down to 40%. 2 wounded, we can't move. Her throat tightened. She pictured them. Huddled against rocks, backs to a wall of fire, eyes darting upward at a sky that had forgotten them. Alpha Actual Phoenix, hold on, I'm coming to you. She dropped the Osprey lower. Valleys narrowed. Every turn was a gamble. She could feel the blades inches from stone. One wrong movement and she'd scatter herself against the cliffs. The enemy knew she was there. She saw the first tracers rise, arcs of red fire clawing toward her. She swerved, rotors groaning, rounds hammering the fuselage. Alarms screamed. She bit down on panic. Closer, closer. And then she saw it, a flare of orange smoke curling upward through the storm. The SEALs. She dove into the valley, engines howling against gravity. Ground fire erupted around her. She felt the impacts like punches against steel. One engine warning lit red. She ignored it. Alpha, this is Phoenix. Get ready to move. I'm landing in 30 seconds. Negative, shouted back. LZ's too hot. You'll be shot out of the sky. I'm not asking, Commander. You've got 30 seconds. The Osprey dropped hard into the narrow valley floor. Dust exploded upward, blinding her view. Shadows darted through the storm, enemy fighters closing in. She swung the nose, opened fire from the forward gun. The air lit with fire. The rear ramp lowered. Figures ran, some limping, some dragging wounded, all carrying rifles like extensions of their arms. She heard their shouts, muffled against the roar of rotors. Move, move, move. They piled in, the cabin filled with bodies and the stench of sweat, blood, and adrenaline. Phoenix, we're aboard. She didn't wait. She hauled the Osprey upward, engines straining under the extra weight. The aircraft lurched, heavy, almost unresponsive. For a moment, it felt like the mountain itself would drag her back down. Come on, she whispered through clenched teeth. Come on. The Osprey clawed higher. Enemy fire raked across its side. Warning lights flashed again. She banked hard, skimming ridges, twisting through valleys with less than a blade's width to spare. The SEALs braced in the cabin, silent. Not because they weren't afraid, but because they trusted her now more than fear. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every second was borrowed life. And then the mountains broke. She burst free into open air, engines howling, fuselage but still airborne. Silence filled the cockpit, not the silence of doubt, not the silence of dismissal, but the silence that comes after death has been cheated. Phoenix's voice finally broke through the radio, softer than she'd ever heard it. You just pulled off the impossible. She didn't answer. She was too busy keeping the aircraft alive, too busy forcing her trembling hands to hold steady until the fuel gauge dipped below fumes and the runway lights of safety finally appeared ahead. When the Osprey touched down, men spilled out, battered, bruised, but alive. 24 in total, not one less. She sat in the cockpit alone for a long moment, helmet still on, tears she hadn't noticed blurring her vision. She had done it, but at what cost? Her aircraft was crippled, her nerves frayed to the edge of breaking, and somewhere deep inside, she knew the truth she would never say out loud. One day, one mission, one valley would come where even she couldn't bend the impossible into possible. But not tonight. Tonight, 24 men were alive. Why did the silence in the debrief room feel heavier than enemy fire? Phoenix sat at the long table, flight suit still streaked with dust, her hair damp with sweat. The lights above buzzed faintly, the kind of sound you didn't notice until your nerves were already raw. Across from her, a panel of officers shuffled papers, avoiding her eyes. Colonel Hayes wasn't here this time. He'd been replaced by other faces, but their expressions were the same, polite, distant, full of practiced detachment. She had just pulled 24 men out of a valley no pilot had dared to enter. She had landed an overloaded Osprey under fire, lifted it through a storm that should have swallowed her whole, and delivered every SEAL alive. And now the first words she heard were, "Captain, explain why you deviated from the planned route." Her chest tightened. She leaned forward, voice steady. "Because the planned route didn't exist. Echo 9 isn't mapped. If I'd followed the route, we'd all be dead." The officers exchanged glances, notes scribbled. One cleared his throat. "You exceeded operational limits of the airframe." "I did what was necessary to bring them home." More silence, more notes. It felt familiar. The same tone she had heard in every squadron, every room where men pretended not to see her. But this was different. This wasn't doubt. This was something colder. They weren't asking to learn. They were asking to cover themselves. The realization hit her harder than turbulence. Someone had sent those SEALs into Echo 9 with incomplete intel. Someone had kept quiet while she walked into the storm blind. And now they were writing reports to make sure blame didn't land on their desks. Her jaw clenched. She answered every question carefully, professionally, but inside something cracked. That night she couldn't sleep. The images replayed again and again, smoke rising, shadows running into her aircraft, tracers slicing the night. She lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, heart pounding as if the rotors still roared around her. The mission had ended, but the fight hadn't left her. At dawn, she found herself on the tarmac watching crews repair the battered Osprey. Its fuselage was torn with holes, paint scorched black, panels missing. Mechanics worked in silence, their hands greasy with the proof of how close she had come. She touched the metal, cool against her fingers, and whispered something she hadn't planned. "I'm sorry." Not to herself, not even to the machine, but to the invisible weight of what it had cost her to bring them home. "Talking to ghosts," a voice said behind her. She turned. He stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed against the morning sun. "You look worse than we did," he said flatly. She almost smiled, almost. "That's because you got to walk away." He stepped closer. "You saved us again, Phoenix. Don't let those suits tell you different." But she shook her head. "You don't understand. They're already writing it up, already framing it. They'll bury the intel failures, they'll bury the risks, and they'll make sure I'm remembered as reckless, not right." Studied her for a long moment, then his voice lowered. "So find the truth. If the system won't protect us, then someone has to." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. Over the next weeks, she began to dig. Quietly. She used her technical access, her background in physics and aeronautics as an excuse to request classified files. She pored over flight logs, communications, after-action reports. Patterns emerged. Too many missions with missing intel. Too many ground teams walking into traps. Too many times when minimal defenses turned out to be death waiting. It wasn't incompetence, it was deliberate. But by who? Her frustration built mission by mission. She flew more extractions, more insertions, each time skirting the edge of disaster, each time hearing the same calm voice in her headset command, Phoenix, requesting updated intel, and each time being told what she already knew wasn't true. And with every lie, the question grew heavier. How many lives had been lost because someone decided they didn't need to know the truth? The stress clawed at her even when she wasn't flying. She found herself staring at walls, her mind replaying valleys, storms, tracers, the echo of explosions. She'd wake at night with her hands clenched as if still gripping a stick. She began to wonder if maybe the voices in those briefing rooms were right. Maybe she was reckless. Maybe she was overthinking. One night after another near-fatal run, she sat alone in the hangar. Her helmet lay on the floor beside her, scuffed, and she leaned against the wheel of her aircraft and closed her eyes. And for the first time, she let herself whisper what she'd never said aloud. "I'm scared." The word hung in the empty air. Scared of the missions, scared of the silence, scared of the truth she was chasing. She didn't notice until he sat down beside her. He didn't speak right away. He just sat quiet, like he knew the weight of silence too well himself. Finally, he said, "You're scared because you're human. Don't confuse that with weakness. Weakness is walking away when others are counting on you." She turned her head. His eyes held none of the dismissive doubt she was used to, only the quiet reflection of someone who had been to the edge and back. "Phoenix," he added softly, "you've got a gift, not just flying, seeing, knowing when something doesn't add up. Don't bury that. Don't let them bury you." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but believing meant accepting that she wasn't crazy. It meant accepting that the silence around her wasn't just habit, it was design. She drew in a long breath. "Then I need proof." "You'll find it," said. "Just make sure you survive long enough to use it." For the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not freedom, but resolve. The missions would keep coming, the lies would keep surfacing, the silence would keep pressing. But she wasn't the same woman who walked into her first briefing and heard laughter. She wasn't the same pilot who waited for permission. She was Phoenix, and she was done waiting. Why did the files keep disappearing? Phoenix sat in the operations center long after everyone else had left. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sterile gray glow she had grown to hate. Her laptop screen flickered with half-loaded reports, access messages, and gaps in mission logs where information should have been. She had dug quietly for weeks, sifting through classified archives under the guise of aircraft maintenance and training analysis. What she found wasn't sloppy record-keeping. It was surgery. Reports cut open and stitched back together. Names missing. Dates altered. Enemy positions erased as if they had never existed. The same pattern every time. Teams sent in blind, intel buried, someone higher up rewriting the truth after men had already bled for it. And the deeper she went, the colder the pattern became. Her last mission log was gone, the entire Echo 9 report stripped clean. She sat back, hands tight on the table, her heart hammered. Someone wasn't just careless, someone wanted the truth erased. The sound of boots echoed in the corridor. She killed her screen, locking the files. A figure stepped inside, a face she knew too well. Colonel Hayes. He shouldn't have been here. He wasn't in the chain anymore, not since she'd been transferred. But here he was, in the heart of Special Operations Command, moving like he still owned the place. "Captain," he said smoothly. His voice carried that same edge of dismissal, but laced now with something darker, burning the midnight oil. She forced her voice calm, "Just reviewing training data." He smiled without warmth. "Of course, training data." He took a step closer, eyes sharp. You're making quite a name for yourself, but names can be dangerous when they get too loud. Her stomach tightened. She knew what he was implying. I follow orders, sir, she said carefully. He leaned on the table, lowering his voice. Do you, because I hear whispers, that you've been curious, that you're asking questions about Echo 9, about intel gaps, about things better left alone. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She kept her face still. With respect, sir, those questions are above my pay grade. Exactly, Hayes said, straightening. And that's how it should stay. He paused, studying her. You're talented, Captain, brave, but bravery without discipline is just recklessness, and reckless pilots don't last long. The words weren't advice, they were a warning. He turned and walked out, boots fatting down the hall. Phoenix sat frozen, the air heavy with the echo of his threat. Her hands trembled against the laptop. She had suspected. Now she knew. Hayes wasn't just incompetent, he was part of it. But how deep did it go? The next week answered her question. Orders came down for a high-priority mission, Grid Zone Kilo 4, a disputed valley straddling another border. Intelligence briefed it as low resistance. Just a few scattered fighters. A quick insertion, a quick. Phoenix felt her chest tighten. She had heard these words before. But when she requested updated satellite images, the system her access. When she asked for electronic warfare analysis, she was told it was not relevant. And when she pressed her commanding officer, he cut her off with the same line Hayes had used before. That's need to know, Captain, and you don't need to know. Her blood ran cold. She walked out of the briefing with her fists clenched. Found her outside, leaning against the hangar wall, eyes locked on the tarmac like it held answers. What's wrong? He asked. They're sending us blind again, she said flatly. I can feel it. The intel's wrong. The defenses will be worse than they're saying. His jaw tightened. Then why brief it that way? She looked at him. For once she said it out loud. Because someone wants us to fail. The words hung between them, too heavy to ignore. Nodded slowly. Then we don't fail. The mission launched at 200. Phoenix's Osprey lifted into black skis, rotors chewing silence into thunder. Inside the cabin, SEALs sat strapped in, weapons across their knees. Some closed their eyes. Some prayed. Sitting near the ramp just stared at her, his expression unreadable. She pushed the aircraft lower, hugging terrain, using valleys as cover. Every instinct screamed caution. Halfway to the LZ, the trap revealed itself. Radar locks lit her display, dozens, a wall of them, modern systems, not scattered fighters, coordinated, precise, waiting for them. Her gut clenched. Hayes, it had to be Hayes. Phoenix, what's wrong? His voice cut through the roar. They know we're coming, she said tightly. We've been set up. Missiles launched, white arcs slicing upward. She banked hard, flares spitting from the Osprey, the cabin jerking violently. SEALs cursed, gripping their harnesses. She shoved the aircraft into maneuvers it was never meant to fly, banking between ridges, diving low enough for rotor tips to skim trees. Warning alarms screamed. Phoenix, hold her steady, shouted as another missile streaked past, detonating in a flare of light. Her knuckles whitened on the stick. She had one thought, one promise beating in her chest. They will not die because of someone else's lies. The valley narrowed, jagged cliffs rising on both sides. No margin, no second chances. She threaded the Osprey through, rotors inches from stone. Missiles slammed into rock behind them, shockwaves rattling her teeth. The SEALs were silent now, watching, trusting. She broke through the pass, sensors clear for the moment, but she knew more were waiting ahead. Her fuel gauge dipped, her systems flashed warnings, but she didn't stop. Because she knew what was waiting on the ground. And she knew what was waiting if she turned back, the smug satisfaction of Hayes and men like him, writing reports that said, pilot refused. Mission failed. Casualties acceptable. Not while she was breathing. Phoenix's voice came again, steady this time. Whatever happens, you get us there. She nodded once, though he couldn't see it. I will. And with that, she drove the Osprey deeper into the fire. How much punishment could one aircraft take before it tore itself apart? Phoenix's Osprey screamed through the valley, rotors thrashing the night air. The cabin rattled like bones in a drum, alarms wailing in every corner of her console. Her knuckles were white on the controls, sweat streaking down her temples. Behind her, 20 men clung to their seats. They didn't speak anymore, not because they weren't afraid, but because they'd placed their fear in her hands. Missiles chased them. White fire bloomed in the darkness, slamming into the mountainsides with thunder that shook the cockpit. One exploded close enough to spray shards of rock across the windshield. Cracks spidered across the glass. Phoenix gritted her teeth. Not today. She shoved the Osprey lower, so low the landing gear almost clipped the ground. The aircraft roared over scrub and stone, flares spitting like sparks from a torch. Her headset crackled. Phoenix, this is command, abort. You're not authorized to continue. She killed the channel. She couldn't afford their voices. Not now. Not when the men in her hold were worth more than the career she'd already risked. Phoenix shouted over the roar. How bad? She didn't look back. Bad enough. He laughed short, dry, without humor. Then just another day at the office. Another missile streaked close. She rolled hard, Osprey blades tilting at a suicidal angle. The aircraft groaned, warning lights flashing red, but it cleared the shot by meters. The SEALs clutched the straps above them, faces pale in the dim light. But not one shouted at her to stop. Not one begged to turn around. They trusted her. And that trust burned hotter in her chest than any missile chasing them. Minutes stretched long. She dodged, banked, scraped through the sky like a blade through stone. But the valley only tightened, the walls closing in as if the earth itself wanted to crush her. The coordinates blinked on her display, the LZ. She saw them before her radar confirmed it, flashes of gunfire, men pinned against boulders, muzzle bursts lighting the night like sparks from hell. Her breath caught. The same scene as before. Different valley, same story. Men abandoned by the system, waiting for someone who wasn't supposed to come. Alpha teams, this is Phoenix, she snapped into the emergency channel. Pop smoke. You've got 30 seconds. Orange flares hissed upward. She dropped hard, skimming the valley floor. Tracers carved the air, rattling against her fuselage like hail. The Osprey shook, screaming warnings, but she forced it down. The ramp slammed open. SEALs spilled out from the rocks, dragging wounded, firing over shoulders. Bullets sparked against the ramp, sparks flying like fireworks. His voice bellowed inside the hold. Go, go, go. Phoenix swung the nose, pouring fire from the forward gun, carving enemy positions into silence. Her vision blurred with smoke and dust, but she didn't let go of the trigger until her men were inside. Phoenix were aboard. She didn't wait. She hauled the Osprey upward, engines screaming as if begging her to stop. The aircraft lurched, heavy with the weight of too many men, too much hope. The valley lit with enemy fire. RPG trails streaked upward. Mortars thundered against the cliffs. One round detonated near the tail, the blast slamming her forward against her harness. Her vision went white. For a moment she couldn't hear, couldn't breathe, just the ringing of near death. Then voices, SEALs shouting, yelling, Phoenix, stay with us. She blinked hard, vision snapping back. Her hand still gripped the stick. The Osprey still flew, barely. She forced it higher, clawing against gravity, engines shrieking. The cabin jolted with every hit. Panels rattled loose. A warning light blared, fuel leak. She ignored it, she had to. Missiles locked again. Too close, too many. She couldn't dodge all of them, not this time. Her mind raced. Every maneuver she knew, every trick, every law of physics she had bent before. None of it was enough. Unless She cut throttle, dropping the Osprey into a dive so steep the cabin screamed with terror. The missiles adjusted, plunging after her. At the last second, she yanked the controls, flipping the aircraft sideways between two cliffs. Metal scraped stone. Sparks flared. The missiles slammed into the walls behind her, detonating in a chain of fire. The shockwave hurled the Osprey forward, engines howling, fuselage shaking like it would tear apart. But it held. She gasped for breath, lungs burning. She didn't know how long the aircraft would survive. Minutes, maybe seconds. But the valley was behind them. The SEALs erupted in cheers. Relief, disbelief, shouted something she couldn't hear the words, only the tone, gratitude, awe. But Phoenix didn't cheer, she couldn't. Because she knew the truth. The system hadn't failed them by accident. Someone had set this up. Someone had decided these men were expendable. And as she fought the crippled Osprey back toward safe airspace, every fiber in her body hardened with a new kind of resolve. Flying had always been her weapon, but now truth would be her war. She wouldn't just save lives in valleys no one dared to map. She would drag into the light the ones who tried to bury them there. Even if it destroyed her. Why did victory feel so heavy? The Osprey limped back into friendly airspace, engines coughing, fuselage torn open in half a dozen places. Phoenix's arms ached from holding the controls steady. Her helmet pressed down like stone. Every nerve screamed for her to let go. But she didn't. She landed hard on the tarmac, the wheels kissing concrete with a jolt that sent sparks down the ramp. The engine sputtered, then died. Silence followed. The SEALs stumbled out, dragging wounded, helping one another, every single one alive. Paused at the bottom of the ramp. He turned, met her eyes through the cockpit glass, and raised his hand in a slow salute, not for show, not for ceremony, but for her. She swallowed hard. For a moment her vision blurred, then she returned the gesture. When she finally climbed down, the ground crew stared, not because she was a woman, not because she was out of place, but because they had never seen an aircraft so broken still standing. She walked past them, her helmet tucked under one arm. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The debrief that followed was colder. Hayes sat at the head of the table again, as if nothing had changed. His face carried that same smooth confidence, but his eyes were harder now, sharper. "You disobeyed mission parameters," he said flatly. "Again. You endangered equipment, personnel, and the mission profile. You will answer for this." Phoenix sat straight, her voice steady. "I brought 24 men home alive. Equipment can be replaced. Lives cannot." Hayes leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You don't understand how this works, Captain. You don't win by being reckless. You win by following the plan." She met his gaze. "Then the plan is broken." The room fell silent. For the first time she saw something flicker across his expression. Not anger, not disdain, fear. Because she knew now. She had seen the patterns, and she wasn't afraid to name them. In the weeks that followed, she gathered proof. Mission logs, edited reports, testimonies from men who had barely made it back. Each piece of evidence painted the same picture. Command had sacrificed truth for convenience, lives for plausible deniability. It wasn't incompetence, it was deliberate. And when she brought it forward, the silence finally cracked. Investigations launched. Commanders questioned. Names dragged into light, Hayes included. She expected the blowback, expected her career to burn, but instead something else happened. The SEALs spoke, not in whispers, not in private, but in full. Led the charge, his voice steady in rooms full of men who had once dismissed Phoenix. He told them what she had done, what she had risked, what she had saved. And one by one, others echoed him. Rangers, operators, pilots who had flown beside her. Their words carried weight Hayes couldn't silence. The tide shifted. Phoenix wasn't punished. She was promoted. But more than that, she was given a mission that mattered. She was tasked with building something new, an operations center dedicated to training pilots for the places maps refused to show. Gray zones, unknown territories, the valleys where lives balanced on blades. At Air Force Base, she built it from nothing. Not just simulators and flight manuals, but a philosophy. She taught young pilots to think differently, to question intel, to adapt, to carry silence not as shame but as strength. Maps will lie to you, she told them during orientation. Command will miss details. Enemies will use terrain against you. But the sky doesn't care. The aircraft doesn't care. What matters is you, your judgment, your discipline, your willingness to risk yourself for the men who trust you to bring them home. They listened, because her name carried weight now. Her program became legend. Pilots competed for the chance to train under her. She shaped them not into perfect flyers, but into something rarer. Aviators who understood that survival wasn't about following orders blindly. It was about knowing when to break them. Years passed. Missions blurred into memories. She earned medals, promotions, commands. But when people asked her what she was proudest of, her answer never changed. 24 men made it out of Echo 9. 12 made it out of Kilo 4. Everything else is just paperwork. When retirement came, she didn't fight it. She had given enough of her life to the cockpit, enough of her blood to silence. Her final day she walked past a room newly christened with a plaque, the Phoenix Room. Inside, cadets sat at desks, studying maps of unmapped terrain, practicing maneuvers she had invented. On the wall hung another plaque, simple, carved in steel. The aircraft doesn't know if you're male or female, young or old, experienced or new. It only knows if you're skilled enough, brave enough, and committed enough to bring everyone home alive. Everything else is noise. She stood there a long time, her hand resting against the doorframe, listening to the quiet hum of young voices preparing for wars they couldn't imagine. For once, the silence didn't press on her shoulders, it lifted. Because she had learned the truth long ago. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.